Spider-Man on the Atari 2600 was the first ever Spider-Man video game, developed and released all the way back in 1982 by Parker Brothers. The object of the game is simple but surprisingly well done given the limits of the Atari hardware. The Green Goblin has taken over several skyscrapers around the city and planted large bombs at the top of them. You play as Spidey and have to scale the skyscrapers using your web, get past Green Goblin, and defuse the bombs. The game is a clever vertical scroller, and you actually do get to swing around as Spider-Man. Okay, sure, this is pretty simple by today's standards, but put yourself in 1982 and imagine playing this. It's very well done and not at all glitchy. You hold down the fire button to fire your web shooter, and you can aim if needed with the joystick or just shoot straight up. When you let off of the fire button, your web will attempt to grab a hold of the building. Don't miss and hit a window or something though, because then Spidey will fall. But that's not the end of it. You can actually fire off your web shooter again while you're falling and try to catch yourself. Again, this is really next level stuff given the hardware here and doesn't take too long to get the hang of. On your way up the building, criminals will occasionally stick their heads out of the windows. You can catch them by just swinging into them or touching them as you climb up. The criminals also cut your web as you're climbing, so be careful. You get 3 lives to start with, and there's a limit to how much web you can shoot, indicated by the web fluid meter in the lower right corner. You can replenish your web fluid by catching criminals, although it may be a bit of a trade-off since you have to swing out of your way to catch them. You'll have to be efficient as you make your way up the building. Miss too many times and eventually you'll just run out of webs, and then Spider-Man does his best Hans Gruber impersonation. As you make your way to the top of the building, it changes to this awkward scaffolding that's much more difficult to hit with your web. Then you've got Green Goblin swinging back and forth and hucking bombs at you. If you touch these bombs, you can defuse them for points, but don't hit them with your web or you'll fall and have to catch yourself. And also you'll fall if Green Goblin touches you or your web. The goal here is to try and defuse the super bomb, which is this little checkboard area at the very top of the building. But this is tricky. You can't actually shoot this directly with your web or you'll fall. Instead, you'll have to shoot near it on the surface of the building and then just sort of swing into the bomb to defuse it. I'm not gonna lie, it took me a good 20 minutes or so of putzing around before I could pull this off. There's a bit of a trick to it, especially with timing it around Goblin's movements back and forth. Once you touch the bomb and defuse it, you'll rack up some extra points and move on to the next stage. Get over 10,000 points and you'll pick up an extra life, although that seems impossible given the fact that you don't get hardly any points from catching criminals, and you don't get that many points for defusing the super bomb either. Like any good Atari game, the difficulty ramps up as you progress. The buildings get taller, you get less web fluid, there's way more of these awkward scaffolding parts, and Green Goblin moves super fast. You can also select multiple difficulty levels if you're a masochist and just want to skip straight to the harder stages, and this game could also be played with 2 players taking turns competing for the high score. Overall, this is a simple but very well done Atari 2600 game that plays surprisingly well and handles complex mechanics like Spidey shooting his web and swinging around with ease. I mentioned before this was released by Parker Brothers, and actually it was developed by just one person, Laura Nikolic. Laura had full creative control over the game and came up with the concept for the vertical scrolling gameplay and using your web to climb up the building. While the other programmers at Parker Brothers were working on Star Wars games, Laura was the lone programmer on Spider-Man and worked on it for about 6 months. This is noteworthy because if this game was getting made today, Marvel and/or Sony Pictures would probably be shoehorning themselves into the development process. But back in 1982, they gave the project to Parker Brothers, who in turn handed it off to Laura, and then everyone stepped back while it got made. Spider-Man on Atari got a nice advertising push, was relatively successful from a commercial standpoint, and is regarded highly among licensed games for the console to this day. Great job, Laura!
I'll blow this town to smithereens! Time bombs! Try to get up there in time, Spider-Man!
Watch me cut my web, Goblin.
Watch yourself fall, Silk Slinger!
Gotta stop the bombs in time.
If I don't get you, webhead, my diagnoses will!
Holy Hannah!
And you're running out of fluid!
Is this more action than even Spider-Man could handle?
These days, Spider-Man on Atari goes for under $10, and I guess it's just a matter of whether or not you're a big Spider-Man fan as to whether or not you'd want to pick this one up. Like I said before, the gameplay is solid and well done. The sound effects are basic Atari fare and not necessarily noteworthy. What really impresses is the ability to swing around as well as catch yourself when you fall. It's some next level programming that is pretty astonishing given it's all done with base Atari hardware. What did you think? Did you play this one growing up or perhaps discover it more recently? What are some of your other favorite movie-based Atari games? As always, thank you for watching. Please don't text and drive, and I'll see you next time on Friday Night Arcade.